At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on February 23, 1945, Captain Alfred Carini stood on the bridge of SS Henry Bacon, watching his radar operator track 23 contacts moving at 240 miles per hour through the Arctic sky, 50 nautical miles behind Convoy RA-64. 42 years old, 18 Atlantic crossings, 0 losses. The German Luftwaffe had sent 23 Junkers Ju-88 and Ju-188 torpedo bombers from Bardufoss, Norway, hunting for stragglers. The Henry Bacon was a 7,000-ton Liberty ship, built in 11 months at a North Carolina shipyard, launched November 1942, designed to carry cargo, not fight wars. But this February afternoon, she carried something more valuable than steel or grain: 19 Norwegian refugees, 16 women, 3 children, rescued from Soroya Island after German forces had attacked Norwegian patriots living in the approaches to Alta Fjord. The Murmansk Run was the deadliest convoy route of the war. Between August 1941 and May 1945, Allied convoys had transported 1,427 ships between Scotland and Soviet Russia. 90 ships had been lost, 63 northbound, 27 southbound. The Arctic waters killed faster than the Germans. 2 minutes in the water without a survival suit, 5 minutes with one. The temperature that afternoon was 40 degrees below zero. Convoy RA-64 had departed Murmansk on February 17th with 38 merchant ships and naval escorts. The Henry Bacon was in ballast, having delivered 7,500 tons of Lend-Lease cargo, including 1 complete locomotive. Captain Carini commanded 41 merchant seamen. Lieutenant Junior Grade John Cipolla commanded 26 United States Navy Armed Guard gunners. The ship mounted 8 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 1 5-inch gun on the stern, 1 3-inch gun forward. On February 22nd, the convoy had run into a Force 12 storm in the Barents Sea, one of the worst storms ever recorded in those waters. Winds at 70 to 90 knots, waves at 35 to 90 feet. The convoy had scattered. Ships lost visual contact. Radio silence prevented coordination. During the storm, the main spring on the Henry Bacon steering gear had broken. The retaining pin sheared. The damage forced the ship to drop behind, while the Black Gang worked to effect repairs. By the afternoon of February 23rd, the Henry Bacon was alone, 50 to 60 nautical miles astern of the main convoy. No escort, no air cover, no help within 2 hours steaming distance. The German bomber group KG-26 had taken off from Bardufoss hunting for the convoy. They spotted the lone Liberty ship first. Captain Carini knew the odds. 23 torpedo bombers against 1 merchant ship with a crew trained to carry freight, not fight Luftwaffe veterans. Liberty ships had shot down German aircraft before, but never against these numbers. The standard tactics said, run, increase speed, try to rejoin the convoy, hope the escorts could provide cover. But running meant abandoning the refugees to their fate if the ship went down during the chase. If you want to see how Captain Carini's decision to stand and fight turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the war. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Carini. The German formation came in low off the starboard bow, wing to wing, 30 feet above the wave tops, extended line abreast, textbook torpedo bomber tactics. The lead aircraft would drop first, forcing the ship to turn. The following bombers would anticipate the turn and release into the predicted path. A Liberty ship's maximum speed was 11 knots. A Junkers Ju-88 cruised at 240 knots and carried 2 torpedoes. Captain Carini gave the order to his armed guard commander. Every gun that could bear on the incoming formation would fire on his command. No gun would cease firing until it ran out of ammunition or the barrel melted. Chief Engineer Donald Haviland stood in the engine room, 51 years old, 30 years at sea. He'd kept the engines running through the storm that had broken the steering gear. Now he'd keep them running through whatever came next. The refugees were berthed in the crew quarters below his station. 16 women, 3 children. Their lives depended on the steel hull between them and the Arctic Ocean staying intact for the next hour. The first Junkers was 2 miles out when Lieutenant Cipolla gave the order to open fire. The 20mm guns opened first. 8 Oerlikon cannons firing at 450 rounds per minute. Tracers arced across the gray water. The 3-inch gun forward boomed. The 5-inch gun aft followed half a second later. The noise was overwhelming, continuous. The deck shook with each discharge. The first Junkers to reach firing range came in at 2,800 yards. The pilot held steady. The torpedo slung beneath the fuselage was clearly visible through the gun sights. A 20mm gunner tracked the bomber and held his trigger. 300 rounds poured into the aircraft's nose section. The Junkers disintegrated. The torpedo detonated while still attached to the aircraft. The explosion was visible for miles. Flaming debris scattered across the wave tops. 2 miles behind the lead aircraft, the second wave adjusted their approach. They spread wider, 6 aircraft coming in from starboard, 6 from port, 11 more holding back to observe the initial attack and exploit any gaps in the defensive fire. The armed guard had trained for this scenario, but never expected to face it. Standard doctrine said 3 to 4 bombers was a heavy attack. 23 was unprecedented for a single merchant ship. The gunners worked their weapons with mechanical precision. Load, aim, fire. Clear jam, reload. The barrels grew hot, red hot. The gun captains rotated crews every 3 minutes to prevent heat exhaustion despite the Arctic cold. A second Junkers pilot faltered in his approach when tracers found his cockpit. The aircraft nosed down and hit the water at 220 knots. The impact was catastrophic. No explosion, just sudden contact with the surface harder than steel at that speed. The torpedo bombers adapted. They came in lower, 10 feet above the waves, so low that the prop wash kicked up spray. At that altitude, hitting the water meant instant death. But it also meant the ship's guns had less time to track and fire. The closing speed gave the gunners approximately 8 seconds from visual acquisition to torpedo release. The third Junkers released at 1,800 yards, too early. The torpedo entered the water and ran true, but Captain Carini had already begun his turn. The weapon passed 100 yards astern. A fourth bomber released simultaneously from the port side. Another miss. 150 yards ahead of the bow. But the attacks had forced Henry Bacon into a predictable pattern. Turn to avoid one torpedo. Present your beam to another attacker. The German pilots understood the geometry. They'd practiced it hundreds of times over Norwegian fjords. The fifth bomber came in from dead ahead. The 3-inch gun fired point blank. The shell entered the bomber's engine nacelle and detonated inside. The aircraft came apart in midair. Pieces of fuselage and wings spun across the water. The torpedo fell free and hit the surface nose first. It didn't arm. The safety mechanism required a clean water entry at the correct angle. 3 bombers down, 4 damaged. 20 aircraft remained combat effective. The attack had lasted 7 minutes. Already the 20mm ammunition reserves were declining. Each gun had started with 2,000 rounds in ready magazines. The gun crews had fired approximately 900 rounds per weapon, 7,200 rounds total. That left 5,000 rounds remaining across all 8 guns. At current rate of fire, 12 minutes of ammunition. A sixth Junkers attempted to approach from the stern quarter. The 5-inch gun tracked and fired. Direct hit. The bomber exploded. Burning fuel spread across the water. The pilot never had time to release his torpedo. A 7th aircraft pulled up and away after watching the explosion. The pilot had lost his nerve. But the German squadron commander was adapting. He'd watched 5 aircraft go down. Watched his pilots miss with their torpedoes. Now he changed tactics. Instead of individual approaches, he ordered a coordinated attack. 8 bombers would approach simultaneously from multiple bearings. The ship couldn't turn away from all of them. At least one torpedo would find its mark. The armed guard gunners saw the formation change. 8 aircraft, 8 different approach vectors, converging on the Henry Bacon from a 360-degree circle, all scheduled to reach release point within 30 seconds of each other. Lieutenant Cipolla made a calculation. 8 guns, 8 targets. Each gun would have to select one bomber and stay with it. No switching targets, no backup. If a gunner missed his assigned target, that bomber would have a clear approach. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Haviland felt the ship's rudder swing hard to starboard, then hard to port, then starboard again. The captain was trying to throw off the bomber's aim by making the ship's movement unpredictable. But rapid helm changes at 11 knots put enormous stress on the steering mechanism, the same mechanism that had broken 24 hours earlier. The same mechanism the Black Gang had jury-rigged back into service with spare parts and improvisation. Haviland heard a grinding sound from the steering gear compartment. Metal on metal. Something was failing. The 8 bombers closed simultaneously. The gunners opened fire. Tracers from 8 20mm cannons converged on 8 different targets across 360 degrees of sky. The mathematical problem was simple and impossible. 8 guns firing at 450 rounds per minute, 56 seconds of ammunition remaining per weapon at current rate of expenditure. 8 bombers approaching at 240 knots. Time to weapons release, 22 seconds. The starboard forward gunner tracked the junkers approaching from 030 degrees. He led the target by 3 aircraft lengths, held the trigger. The gun hammered. Tracers walked up the bomber's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The aircraft rolled left and hit the water inverted. The torpedo broke free on impact, but failed to arm. The port aft gunner engaged a bomber coming in at 270 degrees. His first burst missed high. He corrected. Second burst hit the wing root. The Junker stayed on course. The pilot was committed. The gunner kept firing. Third burst found the cockpit. The bomber nosed down. Too late. The pilot had already released. The torpedo entered the water clean, running hot and straight. Captain Carini saw the torpedo track. Port side, 1,800 yards out, closing at 46 knots. He ordered hard right rudder, maximum helm. The ship began to turn, too slowly. A Liberty ship's turning radius at 11 knots was 1,200 yards. The torpedo would impact before the turn could present the stern. The forward 3-inch gun engaged a bomber approaching from dead ahead. First round miss, high by 10 feet. Second round, direct hit. The Junkers exploded. Debris rained across the forward deck. The gun crew ducked behind their shield. When they looked up, 2 more bombers were inbound on the same vector. Both released simultaneously. 2 torpedoes in the water, approaching the bow from slightly different angles. Carini couldn't turn away from 3 torpedoes at once, 1 from port, 2 from ahead. He chose the lesser threat. Keep the bow pointed at the 2 forward-running weapons. Let them pass on either side, except the hit from the port side torpedo. The mathematics worked. Almost. The 2 forward torpedoes passed port and starboard, 50 yards clearance each side. The third torpedo struck at 15:20 Greenwich Civil Time. Starboard side, number 5 hold. The warhead carried 617 pounds of hexanite explosive. It detonated the aft ammunition magazine. The explosion tore a hole 20 feet across in the hull. The rudder was destroyed. The propellers shattered. The steering engine disintegrated. Water poured into the engine room. The stern settled immediately. The bow rose. The deck took on a 10-degree angle in 30 seconds. Chief Engineer Haviland ordered his black gang out of the engine room. The water was rising too fast. Waist deep, then chest deep. The men scrambled up the ladder. Haviland stayed behind long enough to secure the boilers, prevent a secondary explosion that would kill everyone still aboard. He shut down the fuel pumps, closed the steam valves. Only then did he follow his crew topside. The armed guard gunners kept firing, even with the deck tilting beneath their feet, even with water rising through the lower decks. They engaged the remaining bombers until Lieutenant Cipolla gave the order to cease fire and abandon ship. 5 German aircraft down confirmed, 4 more damaged and streaming smoke as they limped back toward Norway. The remaining 14 aircraft had broken off the attack, low on fuel, low on ammunition, surprised by the resistance. But the Henry Bacon was sinking. The torpedo had destroyed the after third of the ship. The stern was already underwater. The bow was rising higher. 45 degrees. 50 degrees. The ship would slide under within the hour. Captain Carini ordered abandon ship at 1600 hours. 4 lifeboats on the davits. Number 3 boat went over the side and capsized in the heavy seas. The storm had passed, but the swell remained, waves at 15 to 20 feet. The davits to number 4 boat had been damaged during the Force 12 storm 2 days earlier. That boat couldn't be launched. 2 boats remained, number 1 and number 2. Combined capacity, 48 people. The ship carried 67 souls, 41 merchant crew, 26 armed guard, 19 Norwegian refugees, 86 people total. The mathematics were clear. 2 boats, 48 spaces, 86 people. 38 people would have no boat. Chief Engineer Donald Haviland climbed down into lifeboat number 2. He took his assigned seat. The boat was filling rapidly. Young sailors, armed guard gunners, men in their 20s. Haviland looked at the deck above. More men waiting. Younger men. Men who hadn't lived 51 years. He stood up. Haviland climbed back onto the deck. He found Robert Tatoski, 21 years old, messman, New York City, first voyage on the Murmansk run. Haviland pointed to the empty seat in lifeboat number 2. The young sailor hesitated. Haviland didn't. He turned and walked toward the bridge, back to a station, back to where the chief engineer belonged when his ship was going down. Captain Carini had made his decision about the lifeboats before giving the abandoned ship order. Lifeboat number 1 would carry all 19 Norwegian refugees. The youngest and most able-bodied seamen would go with them to handle the boat in heavy seas. The ship's chief radio officer would go with them to operate the emergency transmitter. Give that boat the best chance of survival. Lifeboat number 2 would carry armed guard gunners and remaining crew. Mixed complement. The boat would be filled to maximum capacity, 48 people between 2 boats. Before departing the ship, the chief radio officer left the main radio keyed on the distress frequency, 2100 kilohertz. The continuous transmission would provide a beacon for rescue vessels, but rescue vessels were over 2 hours away. The convoy escorts were with the main convoy, 50 nautical miles ahead. They'd received the distress call, but needed time to reverse course and reach the position. 2 hours in Arctic water. The survival time was 5 minutes, maybe 10 with a life jacket. The convoy escorts would arrive to find bodies, not survivors. Bosun Holcomb Lamont worked on the forward deck. He'd supervised the launch of lifeboats 1 and 2. Now he looked at the crew still aboard. 38 men, no boats. 3 of the 4 life rafts had broken loose during the storm and drifted away. 1 raft remained. Capacity? 8 people. Lamont moved across the tilting deck, collecting dunnage. Wooden beams that had been used to secure the locomotive cargo during the northbound voyage. Heavy timber, 4 inches by 8 inches, 12 feet long. He lashed the beams together with cargo rope, created makeshift rafts, crude platforms, nothing more than wood tied together. But wood floats. Men holding onto wood had a chance. The stern was completely underwater now. The bow pointed 60 degrees toward the sky. The ship was sliding backward, slow but steady. Water rising through the lower decks, flooding the crew quarters, the galley, the cargo holds. Every compartment taking on water added weight. Every ton of water pulled the ship deeper. Lamont finished his 3rd makeshift raft. He ordered armed guard gunners onto the platforms. 6 men to the first raft, 5 to the second, 4 to the third. 15 men on improvised rafts that might hold together for an hour, might fall apart in 10 minutes, but better than nothing. Lieutenant Cipolla climbed onto the last raft with his remaining gunners. He'd stayed aboard after ordering his men to the boats, made sure every gunner had a place. Now only 1 raft remained. 6 gunners including Cipolla. They pushed off from the sinking ship. 23 men remained aboard the Henry Bacon. No boats, no rafts. The ship was going down. The water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Salt water can remain liquid below the normal freezing point. At that temperature, exposed human skin loses sensation in 90 seconds. Core body temperature drops 1 degree every 3 minutes. Unconsciousness comes in 15 minutes. Death in 30. The men still aboard knew the numbers. They'd made the Murmansk run before. They'd seen men go into the water, watch them die in minutes. Some chose to stay with the ship as long as possible, delay the inevitable entry into the water. Others jumped and began swimming toward the rafts, hoping to reach the makeshift platforms before hypothermia set in. Captain Carini remained on the bridge. Chief Engineer Haviland climbed the ladder and joined him. The 2 senior officers stood together. They'd brought the Henry Bacon through 18 Atlantic crossings, through U-boat wolf packs, through Luftwaffe attacks, through Arctic storms. Now they'd bring her through her final moments. The lifeboats were 300 yards away, rowing hard, pulling away from the suction zone that would form when the ship went under. The Norwegian refugees were in lifeboat number 1, all 19, women and children. Safe for now, if the British destroyers arrived in time, if hypothermia didn't kill them in the open boat, if the storm didn't return. At 16:53 Greenwich Civil Time, the Henry Bacon's bow reached vertical. The ship hung suspended for 10 seconds. Then she slid backward into the Arctic Ocean. The suction pulled debris down with her. Cargo hatch covers, ventilators, anything not secured. Some of the men in the water were pulled under. They didn't resurface. Bosun Lamon was in the water. He'd stayed aboard until the end, helping men over the side, building rafts. Now he was swimming, trying to reach the nearest raft, 30 yards away. The cold hit him like electricity, every nerve ending screaming. His arms and legs stopped responding to commands. He could see the raft, could see the men reaching for him, but his body wouldn't move. The British destroyers, HMS Zambezi, HMS Opportune, and HMS Zest, were racing toward the distress beacon at maximum speed. HMS Zambezi was 360 feet long, Z-class destroyer, maximum speed 36 knots. Captain Cecil Allison commanded 186 officers and crew. The ship had been patrolling with Convoy RA-64 when the distress call came through at 15:23. The bearing was clear, 52 nautical miles astern of the convoy's current position. Zambezi turned immediately. HMS Opportune and HMS Zest followed. At 36 knots, the destroyers would reach the position in 1 hour, 26 minutes. The distress call had reported torpedo strike and sinking. Men would be in the water. Arctic water. The destroyer crews knew what that meant. They'd pulled bodies from these waters before. Usually bodies, rarely survivors. The radio beacon helped. The continuous transmission on 2100 kilohertz gave the destroyers a precise bearing. The chief radio officer's decision to leave the transmitter keyed had created a homing signal. Without it, the destroyers would have spent hours searching a 50-square-mile area in failing light. With the beacon, they could steam directly to the lifeboats. At 17:21, HMS Zambezi's lookout spotted wreckage, wooden debris, cargo hatch covers, empty life jackets floating on the swell. The ship slowed to 10 knots. The crew began searching for survivors. The sea state remained heavy from the storm 2 days earlier. 15-foot swells, 20-foot waves. Visibility was good, but finding men in the water among the wreckage required careful observation. HMS Opportune spotted lifeboat number 1 at 17:28. 19 Norwegian refugees, plus 8 crew members, rowing hard to stay warm. The destroyer came alongside. The seas made the approach dangerous. A 360-foot destroyer rolling 15 degrees in heavy swells. A wooden lifeboat rising and falling 20 feet with each wave. Contact between the two vessels would crush the lifeboat. The destroyer crew threw lines. The men in the lifeboat secured them. The destroyer's crew began hauling people aboard one at a time. The Norwegian refugees first, women, children, then the American crew. The transfer took 14 minutes. All 27 people from lifeboat number 1 were brought aboard HMS Opportune. HMS Zambezi found the rafts at 17:35. 3 makeshift platforms of lashed timber, men clinging to the wood, some still moving, others motionless. The cold had taken them. Their fingers were frozen to the ropes, their bodies locked in position by hypothermia. The British sailors couldn't tell who was alive until they brought them aboard. The destroyer stopped dead in the water, too dangerous to maneuver close to the rafts. Instead, the British crew went into the water, sailors with lines tied around their waists, swimming in Arctic water to reach men who'd been in that water for over an hour. The British sailors wore cold water immersion suits, insulated, waterproof. They had maybe 15 minutes before the cold would incapacitate them. The first sailor reached the nearest raft, 6 men clinging to timber. 3 were alive, 3 were dead. The sailors secured lines to each man. The destroyer crew hauled them aboard. The living were stripped of wet clothes immediately, wrapped in blankets, given hot tea. The dead were laid on deck and covered. The second raft held 5 men, 2 alive, 3 dead. The third raft had 4 men, 1 alive, 3 dead. Lifeboat number 2 was found at 17:42 by HMS Zest. 22 men aboard, all alive, all suffering from hypothermia but conscious. The transfer to the destroyer was faster than the first boat. The men could climb the scramble nets with assistance. Within 8 minutes, all 22 were aboard HMS Zest. HMS Zambezi continued searching for men in the water, individual survivors clinging to debris, life jackets, pieces of raft. The destroyer crew worked methodically, grid pattern search, back and forth across the wreckage field. Every piece of floating debris was investigated. They found Lieutenant Cipolla at 17:53. He was in the water. No raft, no debris, just his life jacket. He was conscious, barely. A British sailor swam to him with a line, secured it to Cipolla's life jacket. The destroyer crew began hauling him in. The line was attached. The crew was pulling. Sipala was 10 feet from the destroyer's hull. 5 feet. Then, his life jacket ripped. The old canvas tore under the strain. Sipala fell back into the water. He went under. He didn't resurface. 3 more Navy gunners died the same way, hauled close to rescue, life jackets ripping, falling back into the sea. Too weak to swim, too cold to grab new lines. Boatswain Holcomb Lamont was found at 1804. He was clinging to a piece of wooden hatch cover. His eyes were open, his hand was frozen to the wood. The British sailors pulled him aboard. They tried to warm him, blankets, hot tea, rubbing his extremities to restore circulation. He never regained consciousness. He died at 1809, 5 minutes after rescue. The cold had taken him. But he'd lived long enough to see HMS Zambezi, long enough to know help had arrived. The destroyers continued searching until 1900 hours. Darkness was approaching. The search had covered 12 square miles. The radio beacon had fallen silent when the Henry Bacon sank. No more survivors were found. The final count was assembled in HMS Zambezi's wardroom. 86 people had been aboard SS Henry Bacon when the torpedo struck. 57 were pulled from the water or lifeboats alive. 29 were dead or missing. 22 merchant mariners lost. 7 Navy armed guard lost. All 19 Norwegian refugees survived. Captain Alfred Carini had gone down with his ship. Chief Engineer Donald Haviland had gone down with his ship. Boatswain Holcomb Lamon had died 5 minutes after rescue. Lieutenant Junior Grade John Cipolla had drowned 10 feet from HMS Zambezi's hull. The first mate was lost. The second mate was lost. The first assistant engineer was lost. The second assistant engineer was lost. The 57 survivors were distributed across 3 destroyers. Their core body temperatures ranged from 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. Normal human body temperature is 37 degrees. Below 35 degrees, the heart becomes unstable. Below 32 degrees, cardiac arrest is likely. The destroyer medical officers worked through the night, warming the survivors slowly. Too fast, and the cold blood from the extremities would rush to the heart and kill them. Too slow, and they'd die from hypothermia anyway. 4 men died aboard the destroyers that night. Their bodies had been in Arctic water too long. The cold had penetrated too deep. Warming them only revealed the extent of the damage. Their hearts stopped between 2000 hours and 0200 hours. The medical officers recorded time of death. Cause of death? Hypothermia. 4 more names added to the Henry Bacon's casualty list. The destroyers steamed to Scapa Flow, the British naval base in the Orkney Islands north of Scotland. The voyage took 38 hours at reduced speed. The destroyers couldn't maintain maximum speed with survivors aboard. Too much vibration. Too much motion. The survivors needed stability, warmth, rest. HMS Zambezi arrived at Scapa Flow on February 26th at 0800 hours. The survivors were transferred to shore medical facilities. Some walked off under their own power. Others were carried on stretchers. The Norwegian refugees were taken to separate quarters. Women and children received priority care. Hot baths, clean clothes, food. They'd been through 2 ordeals. First, the German attack on Soroya Island, then the sinking of the Henry Bacon. The American survivors were interrogated before receiving recognition. British intelligence officers questioned them for 6 hours. The interrogation seemed routine at first. Name, rank, assignment. Then the questions became accusatory. How did you survive 2 hours in Arctic water? How did so many of you live when the standard survival time is 5 minutes? Are you certain you were aboard the Henry Bacon when she sank? The intelligence officers suspected German infiltration. Suspected the survivors might be German agents planted in the water near the wreckage, planted to be rescued and infiltrated into Allied naval facilities. The accusation was absurd, but the questioning continued. Show us your dog tags. Show us your identification papers. Explain how you survived. The survivors were cleared after 12 hours. British intelligence confirmed their identities through USS Wakefield crew manifests and War Shipping Administration records. The American survivors were released from interrogation and given quarters at Scapa Flow. On March 2nd, King Haakon VII of Norway arrived at Scapa Flow. He'd come to personally thank the survivors, to present them with the Norwegian War Medal. The 19 refugees had told him what happened, how the American crew had put Norwegian civilians in the lifeboats first, how Chief Engineer Haviland had given his seat to a young sailor, how the crew had fought 23 German bombers for over an hour to protect refugees they'd never met. The medal ceremony was held in the base commander's office. 53 American survivors stood at attention. King Haakon presented each man with the Norwegian War Medal, a bronze cross with red enamel. The ribbon was red with white and blue stripes. The king shook each man's hand, spoke to each man individually, thanked them in English for saving Norwegian lives. The Norwegian government also awarded medals to the men who didn't survive. Captain Alfred Carini received the Norwegian War Cross with swords, one of only 2 Americans to receive that decoration during the war. The medal was presented posthumously to his widow in New York. Chief Engineer Donald Haviland received the United States Merchant Marine Distinguished Service Medal, the highest decoration available to merchant mariners. The medal citation read, "For gallantry and heroism above and beyond the call of duty." Boatswain Holcomb Lamon received the Merchant Marine Meritorious Service Medal for his actions building rafts and helping crew members over the side. The survivors departed Scapa Flow on March 8th aboard USS Wakefield. The transport ship carried them across the Atlantic to Newport News, Virginia. They arrived March 20th, 26 days after the Henry Bacon went down. The survivors were granted 30 days leave, then reassignment to new ships, new convoys. The war wasn't over, but the attack on the Henry Bacon had accomplished something beyond saving 19 refugees. The 14 surviving German bombers from Kampfgeschwader 26 landed at Bardufoss between 1800 and 1930 hours on February 23rd. 9 aircraft were too damaged to fly again without major repairs. Wing damage, engine damage, hydraulic systems shot out, fuel tanks punctured. The maintenance crews counted over 200 bullet holes across the returning aircraft. 5 Junkers Ju-88 and Ju-188 bombers had been shot down. 9 more were combat ineffective. 14 pilots and crew members were dead or missing. KG-26 had lost 1/3 of its operational strength attacking a single Liberty ship. The squadron commander filed his after-action report that night. The report noted that the American merchant vessel had demonstrated unexpected and fierce resistance. The squadron would require 2 weeks minimum to return to operational status. Those 2 weeks mattered. Convoy RA-64 continued west toward Scotland. The German squadron that should have attacked the convoy had been forced to abort. Low fuel, low ammunition, battle damage. The main convoy lost no additional ships. 37 merchant vessels reached Loch Ewe, Scotland, between February 26th and March 1st. 0 losses after the Henry Bacon went down. The sacrifice had achieved its objective. The refugee survived. The convoy survived. The cost was 1 Liberty ship and 29 American lives. But the Henry Bacon's defense had accomplished something else. Something that wouldn't be fully understood until after the war ended. The ship had set a record. No other Liberty ship in the entire war had shot down 5 German aircraft in a single engagement. Most Liberty ships never encountered enemy aircraft. Those that did usually faced 1 or 2 bombers. 3 was considered heavy attack. The Henry Bacon had faced 23 and destroyed 5 confirmed with 4 more damaged. The armed guard gunners had proven that merchant vessel defensive armament could stop determined attacks. 8 20mm guns, 1 3-inch gun, 1 5-inch gun. Standard defensive fit for a Liberty ship. Nothing special, nothing experimental. Just standard weapons handled by trained gunners who refused to stop firing. The battle demonstrated tactics that would be analyzed in naval gunnery schools for decades. How to engage multiple simultaneous threats. How to prioritize targets. How to maintain fire discipline under overwhelming attack. Lieutenant Sippela's decision to assign 1 gun per bomber had been correct. The approach prevented wasted ammunition on targets already hit, ensured every bomber faced defensive fire. The German Luftwaffe learned from the engagement too. The after-action reports from KG-26 circulated through Luftflotte 5 headquarters in Norway. The reports emphasized the danger of attacking defended merchant vessels, emphasized the importance of fighter escort for torpedo bomber missions, emphasized that Liberty ships were not easy targets despite being cargo vessels crewed by civilian mariners. But by February 1945, the Luftwaffe had limited resources for convoy attacks. Fuel was scarce. Aircraft production couldn't replace losses. Experienced pilots were dead or transferred to defend Germany against Allied bombing raids. The attack on Convoy RA-64 was one of the last major Luftwaffe operations against Arctic convoys. SS Henry Bacon became the last Allied merchant ship sunk by German aircraft in World War II. After February 23, 1945, the Luftwaffe never sank another Allied merchant vessel. The war in Europe would continue for another 73 days. Germany would surrender on May 8th, but no more merchant ships would be lost to air attack. The Henry Bacon's final battle marked the end of an era. The Luftwaffe had sunk hundreds of Allied merchant ships during the war, attacked convoys across the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Arctic, developed specialized anti-shipping aircraft and tactics. But by February 1945, Allied air superiority and naval defenses had made such attacks prohibitively expensive. The loss of 5 bombers and damage to 9 more proved the cost was too high. The Murmansk run continued through April 1945. The final Arctic convoy, JW-67, departed Scotland on May 12th and arrived Murmansk on May 20th, 12 days after Germany surrendered. That convoy encountered no enemy action, no U-boats, no aircraft. The route that had been the deadliest in the world had become a peaceful supply run. Between August 1941 and May 1945, 720 Allied merchant ships had traveled north to Russia in 40 convoys. 63 were lost. 707 ships had returned south in 35 convoys. 27 were lost. The Henry Bacon was the 27th and final southbound loss. The survivors carried the memory of that February afternoon for the rest of their lives. Robert Tatosky, the young messman who took Chief Engineer Haviland's seat in the lifeboat, returned to sea after the war. He sailed for 32 years, never forgot the 51-year-old engineer who gave up his life so a 21-year-old kid could live. The Norwegian refugees settled in England after the war. Some returned to Norway when the country was liberated. Others remained in Britain. They maintained contact with the American survivors through letters and occasional reunions. Every February 23rd, they remembered the crew that saved them. The survivors reunited 3 times after the war. First reunion, February 1946 in New York. 13 survivors attended. They gathered at the Merchant Marine Clubhouse in Lower Manhattan, shared stories, remembered the men who didn't come home. The second reunion, February 1955, 10 survivors. The third reunion, February 1965, 7 survivors. Each year, fewer attended. Age, distance, health. But those who came never forgot why they gathered on February 23rd. In 2003, only 3 survivors remained alive. Ernol Campbell, the chief radio officer who rigged the antenna in the lifeboat. Chuck Reed, the steward who jumped into the Arctic Ocean. Normand Croteau, an armed guard gunner who'd manned a 20mm cannon for 73 minutes straight. They met one final time in Washington, told their story to the Naval History and Heritage Command, made sure the record was preserved. The Royal Norwegian Embassy in Washington now sponsors an annual memorial lecture on February 23rd, the SS Henry Bacon Memorial Lecture. Historians present research on Arctic convoys. Survivors' families attend. Norwegian government officials attend. The lecture ensures the story doesn't disappear. In 2001, authors Donald Foxvog and Robert Alata published The Last Voyage of the SS Henry Bacon. The book compiled survivor interviews, official reports, and British destroyer logs, meticulously researched, 534 pages, every detail verified. The book became the definitive account of the ship's final voyage. A memorial plaque was installed at Webb Memorial State Park in Weymouth, Massachusetts, Chief Engineer Donald Haviland's hometown. The plaque reads, "In memory of Chief Engineer Donald F. Haviland, who gave his seat in a lifeboat to a younger shipmate and went down with SS Henry Bacon, February 23, 1945. His unselfish sacrifice exemplifies the highest traditions of the United States Merchant Marine." Another memorial stands at the American Merchant Marine Museum at Kings Point, New York. A bronze plaque lists all 29 men lost with the Henry Bacon. Names, ranks, hometowns. The plaque faces the water, faces east toward the Arctic Ocean where they died. The 19 Norwegian refugees never forgot. They wrote letters to survivors' families, attended memorial services in Norway and America, made sure their children and grandchildren knew the story. Knew that American merchant mariners and Navy gunners they'd never met had put Norwegian civilians in lifeboats first, had fought 23 German bombers, had given up their seats so strangers could live. The Henry Bacon was never raised. She lies in 6,800 feet of water at position 67 degrees 38 minutes north, 5 degrees 0 minutes east. approximately 100 nautical miles north of the Arctic Circle. The wreck sits upright on the seafloor, bow pointing north. The ship rests in international waters. No salvage has been attempted. The wreck is considered a war grave, protected under maritime law. Liberty ships were built to last 5 years, designed as emergency wartime vessels, expendable. The Henry Bacon lasted 28 months from launch to loss, built in 11 months, served in war for 17 months, made 6 round-trip Atlantic crossings, delivered 73,000 tons of cargo to Allied ports. The ship did what it was designed to do, carried the war to Europe, brought supplies to Russia, died protecting civilians. Of the 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war, 200 were lost to enemy action. U-boats sank most of them. Aircraft sank fewer. The Henry Bacon was the last. After her, no more Liberty ships were lost to enemy fire. The war ended before another could be sunk. The United States Merchant Marine lost 9,800 men during World War II, higher casualty rate than any military service except the Marine Corps. 1 in 26 merchant mariners died. They weren't soldiers, weren't trained for combat, were civilians volunteering to carry cargo through U-boat wolf packs and Luftwaffe attacks. They did it anyway. Chief Engineer Haviland was 51 when he gave his seat to Robert Tatosky. He'd lived a full life, 30 years at sea, survived the Great Depression, built a career through skill and hard work. Could have taken that seat, could have justified it, could have said he'd earned it. He didn't. He looked at a 21-year-old kid and made a choice. That choice saved Robert Tatosky. Tatosky sailed for 32 more years, raised a family, had grandchildren, lived to be 73. All because a 51-year-old engineer climbed out of a lifeboat and walked back to a sinking ship. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about merchant mariners and Navy gunners who saved lives with courage and sacrifice. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Norway? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Chief Engineer Donald Haviland, Captain Alfred Carini, Boatswain Holcomb Lamont, and all 29 men lost with the Henry Bacon don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.